thanks for introducing me to this room. And hi, everyone. My name's Apurva Garware. Can you all hear me okay? Is the mic okay? Awesome. And I'm a VP of Product Management at Upwork. And as Tiama mentioned, we're a platform that helps businesses connect with freelance talent really anywhere in the world. It's really a pleasure to be here today. I've come in from San Francisco, the Bay Area, and I was really excited to be in front of this really accomplished group of product folks and talk to you all today. But before I get started, a huge shout out to the Product-Led Alliance. I recollect starting my first conversations with this group back in 2019, and in just 3 years, it's pretty awesome to see the community that's come together. So back in 2019, actually, a story that comes to mind was I was talking to the founding member of the Product-Led Alliance, and we were talking on the Chief Product Officer Summit in San Diego at the time. And some of us even had a WhatsApp group. We were talking about travel. Let me, can you hear me? Does this work? All right, I'll try and lean in. Maybe not. It sounds good. So yeah, we were making these plans, and pandemic.
Just keep going. You're fixing it.
Yeah. Okay. As long as you can hear me, okay. It's a smallish room, so we should be good on audio. Yeah, so the plans got cancelled, unfortunately, but through the pandemic, as I worked on my bucket list, as I'm sure many of you here did, there were a couple of things at the top of the list. One of them was to have more of these in-person gatherings with product folks so you can get to know each other, and to Tiama's point, like really build those connections and share experiences. And the other was to be in London in December to soak in some of the festive spirit. And so to be here today with both of those coming together is really cool, and thanks again for having me. So on the topic of bucket lists and the pandemic, maybe looking back the past few years, let's do a quick show of hands. How many of you felt like the pandemic was an inflection point in your lives? Like there was a pre-pandemic version of your life and a post-pandemic version? Yeah. So that's nearly the entire room, and I'm not surprised because that's what some of the data and insights at Upwork are showing us. We are fortunate to be in a position where we see a lot of headwinds on shifts in the work marketplace through the data that comes in. And that's our topic for today, the future of work. What we'll talk about is how people across the world are really tuning into questions like the why, the where, the how, the who we work with, and how the pandemic offered a giant reset button that was sort of the trigger to these questions. But before we go into that, let me tell you a little bit about my journey into product and into my role at Upwork. So I was born and raised in Mumbai, India, and growing up, I had a real penchant for writing. I thought I'd be a journalist someday. It was my dad. I still kid with him. I say, you had a crystal ball of sorts, because he said software is going to eat the world. So I really encourage you to go pursue a path in software, in computer science. So I studied computer science. I graduated from Mumbai University, went to Carnegie Mellon, and from there got my first job as a software engineer at Microsoft. And a few years in, it was late one evening, and I was coding this really complex sync engine between billing components behind Windows Azure. It sounds really boring, and it really was. But I had an epiphany, and the epiphany I had, the realization I had was, while I'd never be a rock star engineer, and I still stand by that, I really lit up, and what gave me joy was building bridges and making connections. And looking back, that was such an important realization because it guided my choice of roles and companies. And I may not even have known this at the point I was making those choices, but that's what I was optimizing for. And over the course of time, that's led to my career path as a marketplace product manager. I went on to build search and discovery products at Amazon, connecting users with entertainment media like books and music and videos. I built products at Medium and Quora to connect readers with stories they love, at Chegg with connecting students to learning products, and now at Upwork, connecting knowledge workers to opportunities. And the reason I share that is because it's actually two reasons. One is when you tune into what gives you joy and what really gives you fulfillment, looking backwards, it really helps you connect the dots and optimize for yourself. And it puts the day-to-day in perspective, letting you take a step back from the grind when it can really get to you. And the second reason I share this is because remember the flair for writing we talked about and the journalism and all of that? Well, inspired by Tiama in large part, but I've gone back to writing. I blog on Medium and Substack. I'm hosting my own podcast soon, and I host several Clubhouse sessions and have a pretty strong following across all of these platforms. And both these points tie back to the future of work, because that's really what people across the world are embracing. They're blending their personal and their professional lives, and they're building these multi-dimensional identities that let them really bring their whole self to work. And so that's a great segue into 2020. Let's rewind 2 years back and just take a moment to think about where you were and the feelings you were experiencing back then. This is a picture of my kid hiking in the woods. This was probably the only respite we had from the wildfires and the pandemic. And speaking for myself, we were filled with loneliness, with anxiety. We didn't know if the vaccines were going to be out. There was a big election around the corner in the US. There was just a lot of unknowns. And if we sat down here and shared our stories, I'm sure we're going to unpack many, many layers of complex pain and grief. But through that, a separate phenomenon was underway, a phenomenon that we now look back and call the pandemic pause or the great reinvention. And that was where people across the world were asking themselves questions like, what do I want to do with my life? What are my priorities? Where do I want to spend my time? And what does work need to mean to me? And the answers they received to these questions was creating a spotlight. It was casting a spotlight on areas that were not working for them. And that was an accelerant to changes that define the future of work today. In other words, people stopped serving work and work has started serving people. We see this on the flip side as well for businesses. Overnight, businesses had to go from in-person operations to online operations. You had managers that need to now keep a pulse on employees through Zoom meetings, where they earlier could just get vibes and on retention and engagement through in-person interactions. You had leaders who now need to do planning and brainstorming with whiteboards, virtual whiteboards versus a marker in hand. And all of these changes just have created impetus for what we now call the pandemic pause or the great reinvention. So as we go through the slides today, we're going to come back to these three anchors, these three trends that we are seeing through the data time and again. The first being employees are seeking work-life fulfillment, and flexible work is at the core of it. The second, remote work is good for businesses and it's good for employees, and it has really leveled the playing field. And number three, freelancing is on the rise and will change how work gets done. At the core of it, flexible work is really based on the premise that if you give employees the space to create their full lives and allow them to fit work into it, it will help them do their best work. And I'm sure we can relate to that as knowledge workers ourselves. Like sometimes the most creative unlocks happen when you're walking your dog in the park or you're taking a hike in the woods. It doesn't have to be in front of your laptop at a certain time of the day. And that's what we are seeing as well. The data shows this. This is a study that was done by McKinsey earlier this year in June. And the top three motivators after better pay and better career opportunities, number three is flexible working arrangements. This actually follows close on the heels of a similar study that was done in the early days of the pandemic. And back then, a flexible working arrangement was at the top of the list. And that's no surprise. People wanted to be in a safe space. They wanted to know that they were healthy and they could keep their families healthy. So they optimized for that. But 3 years hence, 3 years into a more normal life, when we think things are going back to normal, a flexible working arrangement is number 3 on the list after pay and career opportunities. And for hiring managers like everyone here, this is really important. Because if you think about it, if you have a great candidate out there that you think you've sold with a better pay or with promising better career opportunities, chances are pretty high that they're going to walk away if a flexible working arrangement isn't a part of the deal. The key here, especially at leaders though, is to realize that flexible work means different things to different people. It's often taken to synonymously be used with remote work, but it's not. Flexible work means different things to different people and to different companies. For a working parent like myself, flexible work is the option to work from home at least 3 times a day. So I can step in to get lunch with my husband or play with the baby when she's up from her nap. But for younger professionals that are right out of college, their work life is the basis of their social life. They embrace in-person work, they thrive and they crave for company, and they want to do in-person discussions some more and hang out and get to know their colleagues after. And for yet others, it's the option to live out of a suitcase, to really travel and explore the world while work continues and doesn't have to stop. And that's where a platform like Upwork helps, because Upwork takes tax management and income stability out of the picture regardless of where you are, and lets the train keep going. What's also remarkable is, despite varying levels of exposure to flexible work within industries, even different industries have embraced flexible work arrangements. And we see this across the board. A half of all educational instruction is online. Healthcare practitioners, doctors and nurses do telemedicine more than half the times to free up their flexibility for on-call rotations. Even restaurant operations are moving to what are called ghost kitchens, where meals are prepped out of really anywhere, giving consumers the ability to order food online and allowing restaurants to scale their operations faster and to more locations. All in all, flexibility is really opening up new avenues for both employees and for businesses. That said, it's really important to internalize that flexibility means the space for more choices. It does not mean lack of structure, or it does not mean lack of processes and tools. The rules and behaviors around work are changing, and what's really important for companies to internalize is experimentation. Saying, here's what we know today, here's our inputs today, and therefore here's what our experiment for today looks like. That said, we are willing to evolve and embrace learnings as we go. And being really transparent with your teams and your employees about that, so they know what to expect and they know how to plan for themselves. So what does this mean? So let's say you are a 10-person startup, and you believe that being in an office space together is really important to unlock fast decision making and moving quickly. Well, that's totally fair, but be open with your employees about that. Talk to them about why they need to be in person. Talk to them about them needing to be in person 3 days a week, 5 hours a day, and what that means for them. If you're going to be using that time for daily stand-ups, then honor that. If you're going to use the time for brainstorms and jam sessions, then respect that. But just giving that clarity, providing that clarity to employees is what helps them do their best work, as well as help them plan the rest of their lives. On the other side, let's say you're a remote company like we are. We have about 1,000 employees, all of who are in various parts of the world, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. But even for us, even for Upwork, that's always been remote for the 20 years that we've been around, the pandemic needed some changes to how we operated. We needed to be intentional and explicit about the guidelines and the guardrails we were setting for our teams. For instance, the default is that cameras are on for important meetings. The default is also that core group meetings happen during certain times of the day that are conducive for different time zones across the world. We've also moved to certain tools for certain use cases. For instance, we use Slido for Q&A, we use Miro for whiteboarding and brainstorming, we use Figma for designing. And so just knowing what tools we're going to be used, what the guardrails are, what the best practices are, takes one unknown out of the day-to-day for our teams and lets them focus on getting work done. And the hybrid or the fusion of these is the hybrid work policy, where most of your work is done remotely, but you still meet in person off and on. We just had 2 VP offsites for VP level plus employees at Upwork, one in Monterey, California, the other in Chicago. And they were a great way for leadership to come together, to mesh their ideas, to align on the vision, and go back re-energized to their teams. So that's another way of organizing your teams and your time. One way or the other, what's really important is being clear and also being open to change as you get more input. So that brings us to the second shift, which is around remote work. And I define remote work here as a subset of flexible work. So it's really that bucket of work that happens all virtually, all online. And what we're seeing is through the data, remote work is good not just for businesses, but also for employees, and has also leveled the playing field. So a study done by Upwork earlier this year shows that on average, remote work for each business helps the business save $10,000 per employee per year. And this is money that's saved from rent, electricity, cleaning costs, food in some cases. More importantly, the time that employees now have back from commute is time spent building relationships or investing in their hobbies or spending time with their loved ones, all of which helps them be 45% more productive and results in a 63% reduction in unscheduled absences. On the other side of this, remote work is good for employees too. Well, on average, an American employee saved $4,300 on commute-related costs. That's parking permits, that's cost of fuel, that's cost of other transit-related expenses. And similar to the points above, 61% reported they were more productive from the time earned back and from the time now they have for a more fulfilled life. And back in 2020, when the survey was started, 23 million people reported, extrapolated of course, from the survey, reported that they planned relocation due to the option of remote work. So these are just some stats that go to show that the health of the business and the employee overall is robust with remote work options. What we're also seeing is the benefits of remote work for marginalized groups. All of us here aspire to create diverse, inclusive, equitable organizations and teams where everyone can have fair opportunities and do their best work. But the truth is we are woefully far from there. And a recent study done by the NY Times shows that marginalized groups, people in marginalized groups, be they women or people of color or even people who are aged 55 and above, reported higher levels of engagement and a deeper sense of belonging when they had the option to do work remotely versus being present on campus or in person. This is kind of relatable. For me personally, pre-pandemic, I'm a self-confessed introvert. And so showing up to a meeting, I'd spend most of my energy in figuring out what's the right time to raise my hand and make my point. Versus now with Zoom meetings, with the raise hand emoticon, I am so engaged and I'm listening in, knowing full well that when I have a point to make, I can just step in. More importantly, it's created a culture within our teams where we really invite ideas and opinions whenever someone has the chance to share them. And it's helped us have really effective and productive meetings at the end of the day. But drawing out this analogy a little further, there's introverts like me out there who may not enjoy discussing fantasy football games after work. There's working moms who need to step out at 4 to pick up their kids and are always going to miss out on socials or happy hours. And in the past, that cost them career advancement. The bottom line is the data shows that in any way you cut the representation of marginalized groups, each of these groups feels like they're more represented and feels like they're treated more fairly in a remote work setting. This is Bodin. He's a Ukrainian freelancer. He works on Upwork. He's a mobile developer in SaaS software. So for anyone that's hiring for those skill sets, definitely recommend him. When the war struck in April, Bowden moved from his apartment to the basement of his building, where he had to set up a makeshift tent, and he was frantically emailing his clients on the other side, letting them know that his timelines could not be met because of the war and its implications. It's been a few weeks since then. He was relocated to a safer space with his family, but his income from Upwork is still his primary source of income. And it supports not just him and his family, but his parents, his grandparents, and his close friends. And that's not just Bowden, that's many, many others like Bowden that war and strife affects, but that are still able to live their day-to-day with the income that they generate through online work and through remote work. And last but not the least, remote work has been game-changing for women. In the US, 2 million women dropped out of the workforce during the pandemic for various reasons, but childcare being a primary one. 1 out of 4 C-suite leaders is a woman, and 1 out of 20 is a woman of color. And when you look at these statistics and you marry them with research studies like a recent one done by McKinsey just earlier this year that says remote work is what women prefer because they cite fewer microaggressions and a greater feeling of psychological safety. This is feelings related to someone mistaking them for someone junior or someone questioning their judgment time and again. But what's really remarkable is that this year, women leaders have left their companies at higher rates than ever before, which signals that they would rather leave than compromise. And finally, I'll touch on freelancing, which has been on the rise for many years now, but with the pandemic, there was really a step change, and that's showing no signs of slowing down. This is a study that was done by Statista, and that shows that half of the US workforce, that's close to 90 million people, in just 5 years from now, are going to be freelancing. And this is a huge shift. For those of us that have been close to freelancing, this hasn't been the norm. Like the norm has been to graduate, to get a well-paying job and to stay and grow or look for opportunities within your industry. But this shift, where half of the US workforce is considering freelancing, is huge. And it's happening because younger generations of workers are realizing that a steady job and a steady rise through the ranks doesn't necessarily mean a low-risk proposition. It is a high-risk proposition, particularly in market turbulence times like now, where no job is recession-proof. And the same study goes on to say that 44% of those freelancers have reported having higher earnings than they did in a full-time job. How about companies? A third of all workforce in the average enterprise company is going to be independent talent and is in fact already independent talent. What are the reasons for this? If we go back to 2020 when the pandemic was hitting us, for those of us here that were hiring back then, we can attest to how hard it was to find skilled talent. You'd have open roles and then you'd have 6 months of a lead time even for entry-level designers or product managers. I was at Chegg at the time. I was not affiliated with Upwork, but we actually opened roles in Upwork in parallel with open headcount on our jobs portal because we knew those jobs would fill faster and we'd have someone to do the project sooner. And that's what was unfolding, which is companies across the globe really were embracing independent talent, embracing freelancing during the pandemic. Fast forward 2 years, 2022, market turbulence. The same companies are now using their full-time budgets to hire freelancers. 85% of companies surveyed by Fiverr recently said that they're going to have a hiring freeze. They're not going to hire anymore to control their operational costs. And some of those are going on to use those budgets to hire freelancers. That spurs innovation because at a time like this when resources are scarce, if you can get high-skilled talent on demand to do the job on time, you can unlock innovation and get ahead of your competitors in a way that others can't. And the data tells us this as well. The dark blue lines are the lines representing companies that have embraced freelancing. The light blue ones are the ones that haven't. And the dark blue companies, the ones that have engaged freelancers, have shown higher confidence in sourcing and hiring for their needs, as well as in getting through the market turbulence compared to the ones that haven't. That's all I have. It's a wrap. So these are the three anchors, the clear shifts we are seeing: flexible work, remote work, and the shift to freelancing. At the end of the day, I'll be honest, like, no one's figured this out. We're all winging it. We're all trying to figure out what's right for us, what's right for our companies. But the difference between good and great cultures is really coming back down to these three things. 1, be open to experimentation. 2, be intentional about your culture. And 3, be kind. Everyone's going through a remarkable amount of unknowns. Thank you.
Some people can't be trusted to work remotely, but bluntly, and what's your view on that? Because there's lots of different ways you can solve that.
Yeah, so it really depends on what industry you're working in, as well as, you know, where you are in your stage of hiring. So let's say you're in an industry where you have the flexibility to get remote work. So it's not a question about getting the job done, it's more a question of trust, right? And if you are also working with an inherited team, because if you're hiring a new team or building a new team, you can screen for that. There's ways to screen for that. But if you're working with an inherited team and you do believe that this team just cannot be trusted to work remote, well, I would say if that's your situation, that's your call. And like, you know, to my point earlier in the slide, flexibility is not the same thing for everyone. And if for your company that means in-person operations, do it. You know, talk about what that means for you, what the parameters are. If it's 3 days a week, if it's 5 hours a day, just be clear about that and get your employees in, use the time for the purposes you've laid them out to be, and see how it goes from there.
But you punish the 8 people out of the 10 that can be trusted because of the 2 people that can't.
Well, if that's the scenario you're talking about, I'd say we need a strong performance management and evaluation system, right? If it's a matter of trust that's holding you back from unlocking strong work with your employees, then sit down and have a conversation around what's blocking that trust. Because that could happen even in person. I mean, there's no guarantee that you bring those 2 people in and they're going to turn around. So it's really about coming up with the frameworks that helps you build strong teams. And if that should work as effectively online as it should in person.
Do you have any thoughts about like building or nurturing company culture when there's like a lot of distributed employees and there's limited or no face-to-face interaction? How do you build a company culture around that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's something we run into a lot at Upwork. We are a company of about 1,000 employees, but only 250, so only 25% of that is full-time employees. The remaining is all actually what we call freelance talent. They work on Upwork, but they're freelance through Upwork. I think I can share a few best practices for us. Q&A with our CEO. Really anyone can come in, ask a question, and she takes time to talk through her rationale for decisions or shifts that the company is going through. And that's created a lot of trust and transparency between our teams in just like being open about the challenges we are facing and our strategy to them. Number 2 is small things like being mindful of the time zones that we are scheduling meetings in. And so we have certain blocks of the day which we know work really well for whether it's Asia or Europe or the US, and that's when meetings get scheduled. You're free to have meetings outside of those time zones, but those would be for co-located time zones only. And then every team also has its own budget. Every leadership has its own budget. So let's say that you have an analytics team and you have a team spread across Latin America, US, and Eastern Europe. You have the budget then to fly them into any central location that works for you and for your team once a year. And you bring them in and you can use that time for alignment and getting to know each other, and then you go back. So those are some things that have worked really well for us, alongside just simple things, very tactical things like settings in Slack that tell you what time of the day it is or that it's too late for you to be pinging someone.
Hi. I was just wondering what you thought about employee protections. So, for instance, you spoke a lot about, I think it was 50% of the US workforce was going to be freelancers. Obviously, the US and the UK have slightly different employee protections, but in a situation where you have a full-time employee and they're not performing well, they obviously get like redundancy packages and stuff like that. Whereas if, you know, half the workforce are just day-to-day employees, they get no protection in a downturn. So just kind of what your comment on that is really from like a employee and a business perspective.
Yeah, so speaking for, you know, like how we do it at Upwork, when even if you are engaging a freelancer on the other side, at the end of the day, our core principle is a team member deserves respect, or deserves, you know, the same kind of space and trust that a full-time employee would. And that goes back to influencing a lot of our decisions in regards to how we engage with freelance talent. Now, that depends from a company to company basis, and so it really goes back to like what your company's appetite is for, you know, expanding those privileges or accommodations to everyone. But working backwards from those core principles has allowed us to be really generous when it comes to working with independent talent as well. For example, if we offer holidays and time off to full-time employees, there's usually an accommodation made for independent talent to have the same days off at, you know, paid time off during the same holidays, even if they don't observe those holidays nationally and so on. So that's just one example, but I think if you work backwards from first principles of respect and just like treating freelance talent and full-time employees with the same respect and trust, you can work backwards from there to come up with policies that work best for your company.
We have time for one more question.
So pre-pandemic, when people went remote, it was basically just eliminating the commute to everyone. They were outside, maybe London, for example. Now there's more a nomadic lifestyle of a starting kind of a trend, and companies also just allowing people to work anywhere in the world for maybe 3 months, for example. Are you seeing, are there changes in terms of the way that companies work, or is remote just remote anywhere, or is the nomadic lifestyle actually changing the way you look at remote workers too?
Yeah, so I'll just play back that question and let me know if I got it right. So the question is, with the sort of like re-emergence back to some normalcy from the pandemic, are companies giving workers the ability to live a fully nomadic lifestyle, or are they requiring them to come in?
I think are there any other accommodations you need to make as a company when people are now working, you know, completely remote, you know, on a beach somewhere or in a different country from where maybe their home, where the rest of the team is? Or is remote just anywhere, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think what I've observed is, like, from the friends, anecdotal stories of friends and coworkers around me, as well as you know, our situation at Upwork itself. You need to have guardrails drawn, right? Like, there are going to be tax implications depending on which state in the US that your workers are working out of, or which country they're working out of, for example. So one policy that we have, for instance, is if you are working internationally outside the United States, it has to be time boxed. It can be as long as, you know, 3 months or 6 months, but it's got to be time boxed, and at some point you've got to come back to the primary residence or the primary country that you say you're working out of. Similarly, for the states that you're working out of, like, different states have different implications, tax implications in particular for the United States, and so we have different policies depending on which state you're working out of. So it goes back to you know, what we said about remote work not necessarily mean completely lack of structure. I think there need to be certain boundaries drawn, and within those boundaries, just giving workers the flexibility to design their lives is what is the norm that we are seeing. Because if it's really like boundless and there's no structure, then it actually leads to a lot of chaos and confusion, and holds back from people doing their best work.
Perfect. Okay, let's give her a hand, everybody.